Hi, all. These are generally conversations between adults after the children have left the table. The language can be spicy, and the subjects can get saucy. So, if you're ready, this is the Southern Fork. Unscripted chats with some of the most interesting culinary voices in the American South. This region is one of the country's vacation and retirement playgrounds. But beyond the warm weather and beautiful scenery, there's a rich culture steeped in community and often dark and complicated history, and plenty of innovation among the tradition. I'm Stephanie Burt, and I've spent a career covering this region for magazines, newspapers, and websites. And to me, the best introduction to the American South is through its food culture and the growers and makers who make it delicious. I invite you to come on the road with me from the Appalachian Mountains to the clear waters of the Gulf of Mexico and everywhere in between. I'm always hungry for that next bite, thirsty for the next sip, and ready for the next conversation. Let's dig in. Hi. Before starting today's episode, I wanted to share a podcast with you. I think you might find it very inspiring. It's called Our New South, hosted by veteran journalist Kevin Blackistone and professor of history at Claflin University, Robert Greene. This podcast offers a unique look at the evolution of the New South and how historic Southern cities, including my hometown, Charlotte, North Carolina, are confronting complex issues ranging from equity in education and immigration to civil rights, racial equality, and socioeconomic mobility. Past guests have included Congressman Bobby Scott, former South Carolina House Representative Bakari Sellers, and the president and CEO of the NAACP, Derek Johnson. Find Our New South wherever you get your podcasts. Now, on with the show. Despite the bio I'm about to share, I think Ray Isle is one of the least pretentious people in the wine world today. He grew up in Houston, and he's learned to see wine as an adventure that's taken him all around the world. Ray is the longtime executive wine editor for Food and Wine, as well as the wine and spirits editor for Travel and Leisure. He writes Food and Wine's monthly What to Drink Next column, as well as regular feature articles for both magazines. His writing has also appeared in Departures, Wine and Spirits, Time, The Washington Post, and many other publications, and he's been nominated 3 times for a James Beard Award. His new book is The World in a Wine Glass, The Insider's Guide to Artisanal, Sustainable, Extraordinary Wines to Drink Now. So exciting to say this. Welcome to the Southern Fork, Ray Isle.
I'm psyched to be here. Looking forward to it.
Great. Well, we are sitting in, honestly, one of my super happy top level places in Charleston, and that is Graft Wine Shop. And you love these guys, right?
I love the Graft guys. I love everybody at Graft, not just the guys. It's a great team with an amazing place to hang out and drink a glass of wine or have some snacks.
It is. And there's always a great vibe here. I always see people I know here, and I always learn a little bit about wine here. Graft has definitely been part of my wine education, and it's really opened up something for me as a writer. I'm become very interested in wine as a product. And so that's why I really wanted to have you on today, not to talk about varietals or what we should drink with a certain food,
right,
but to really talk about wine as a thing, because as a theory and as a way to really invest your time, because how long have you been the wine editor of Food and Wine?
I've been the wine editor of Food and Wine since 2005, which is mind-blowing. It's kind of like a million years in magazine years. But I've been very fortunate. It's a great place to work, and it's been really wonderful to have it as a home. Because I love food as well, and I've never worked in a restaurant, but I have certainly cooked a lot, and so landing at Food and Wine was kind of ideal for me because I could write about wine, and then I could just absorb on the food side.
Yes, and it is an absorption. I have to say, what attracted you? I think you were one of those English majors. Like me, right?
I was one of those English majors.
For some reason, English majors end up gravitating toward food and beverage a lot. Do you find that?
I do find that. Yeah, there's a lot of ex-English majors or former or people who were English majors and then kind of got out and were like, "What the hell do I do now?" And a lot of times the route is through restaurants, obviously, but it's also through food writing and everything else. And I think the virtue of an English major is it doesn't tie you into doing any one specific thing
because you can't get a job.
Because you can't get a job. So, I think I know a winemaker in Oregon who was an English and comparative literature major, and his father, who was a surgeon, apparently told him, the one thing you need to know is when you graduate as an English major is the one thing you need to be able to say is, "Do you want fries with that?"
Well, what attracted you to writing about wine? Because you really have to study it as I'm getting into it. We have to know more about the subject that we're writing about than the article that we're doing in order to provide a great boning, editorially. Yeah. So what attracted you to the study of it?
Well, it's interesting. I think everybody who starts in wine gets attracted initially by just the hedonistic aspects, that it's tastes amazing and obviously it has some alcohol in it. But I think what happens for people who really get into wine is you pretty quickly start getting interested in, the nuances of where it came from and what vineyard it comes from and, what the nature of Pinot Noir or Cabernet Sauvignon is, and then vintages and things like that. And then from there, if you stay interested, then it just kind of unfolds because you've got 8,000 years of cultural history, more or less. You've got economics, you've got agriculture for sure. You've got the science of winemaking, and you've got all these personal stories that go with it as well. And so for me as a writer, I got very fortunate that I stumbled into it because I didn't grow up in a wine drinking family at all.
Do you remember the wine that unlocked it for you? Okay, let's talk about that.
This is everybody in the business has that wine that kind of opened their eyes. And for me, it was a bottle of 1984 Diamond Creek Volcanic Hill Vineyard Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. And I was at a dinner with my girlfriend at the time and her father, and he'd been to Napa and I had the wine before. He wasn't a wine guy. He was actually a Unitarian minister, or maybe he was Episcopalian. I've forgotten at this point. But I just remember being at this dinner with them at a restaurant and, taking a sip of the wine and then taking another couple of sips and then just being like, whoa, what is this stuff?
Right.
And to the point where I was paying more attention to, the wine than I was to either my girlfriend or her father, which may explain the demise of that relationship. But the wine relationship kept going,
Right.
So
a lot of people start with red wine and they don't really go further than that. And I think I hear this a lot in the beverage space, which I wouldn't hear as much in the food space. And that is they take one bottle of one varietal and they go, I don't like that. Right. And then forevermore, they don't like Cabernet Sauvignon.
Right.
Or they don't like Chardonnay. So how do you counteract that from an editor standpoint? Because you are inviting people by your work all the time, by what you're doing here today, to actually overcome that.
Yeah, I think one of the things with wine versus food is we start drinking wine, in theory, at least when we're 21. Let's say, we can count back to 18 or 16 even, but legally at least 21. But it's unlike food, which we start eating solid food when we're 1 or something. We know what we like with food. I think for a lot of people, not people in the food business, but just, readers of Food and Wine, the discovery with food is discovering sort of other food traditions. And that's the way you learn about stuff that you didn't know about before. And with wine, you you kind of start learning about all of it once you're already an adult. It is opaque, and it is, there's a lot of information out there that's not simple necessarily. And there's a whole attitude of pretentiousness associated with it, which I wish would evaporate tomorrow instantly. It is fermented grape juice. It's not that, it's not that daunting.
It comes from the farm.
It comes from the farm. And, but I think, I kind of say two things to people, which is one, push past whatever you think you already like and try new things, because that's the only way to learn about wine. But then the other thing is, it's very important to the people who aren't in the business to kind of empower them and say, if you don't like something, you don't have to drink it. If I say a wine has 93 points and you're like, but I don't like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, then
which is not
been fine.
You picked the one that I don't love.
Yeah.
And I love Sauvignon Blanc, but I haven't really enjoyed once I tried other regions.
Right. The New Zealand style.
The New Zealand style, which is a lot more
it's more
sour,
it's more
grapefruit
in your
pop.
face. It's got that
exfoliating
green pepper kind of, head shading towards jalapeno aspect of Sauvignon Blanc that some people, New Zealand's a great example because people either love it or they hate it. There's very few people who are neutral about it. And so the people who really don't like it. But that doesn't mean you won't like Sancerre, or it doesn't mean you won't like, a fairly warm climate Sauvignon Blanc from Southern California that has much more kind of like melon and tropical fruit flavors than it does, grapefruit peel and green peppers. That's one way you start explaining to people. First thing, people basically start off thinking, I like red, or I like white,
right,
or I like bubbles, or all three, or whatever. And then gradually they decide I like Cabernet, or I like, Burgundy, or whatever. And then there's that point where you can say, well, not all Cabernets are the same. If you have a Cabernet from Paso Robles, it's very different than a Cabernet from the Medoc in France. And you always see people's eyes kind of, if they're interested in wine, it's one of the great joys of doing wine classes is, people get excited about it and you can see them turn on,
That's one of the places I did an ABC class, anything but Chardonnay, but it was all about Chardonnay.
Right.
And Raj was part of it. It was at Palmetto Bluff years ago. And I was hey, I don't like Chardonnay.
Yeah.
Because I'd had Rodney Strong Chardonnay. No offense to Rodney Strong, but
right. It was and particularly in whatever era, that was probably a certain style of Chardonnay, which was big and round and probably buttery to some degree from malolactic.
Stirred with a stick of butter.
Stirred with a stick of butter and, and then socked into oak barrels, new oak barrels, for a long time. And Chardonnay is a great example because it's not really disliking Chardonnay. It's disliking a specific style of Chardonnay.
Right. And then I realized I love the Chardonnay from Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
I'm like, and I now can look for that on a list. So what cracked it open for me was geography, because that's how I work in the world. I'm very focused on food of a particular place.
Yeah.
Is that in your book? The World in a Wine Glass
it's very much about geography. And one of the main sort of divisions that I kind of point out in the book is the division between, what you could call kind of mass market or industrial wine. And look, if that's what you love drinking, go right ahead.
There's also something called field conditions.
Yes.
Jace McConnell taught me that term, and he was like, sometimes there are field conditions.
Yeah, that's true. If it's, I think the example I use in the book is like if I finish a hike in hot weather and someone hands me a cold Budweiser, well, Bud's not my favorite beer, but I'm not going to say no, and I'm going to be pretty damn happy about it.
Yeah.
So with wine, fine. Yellowtail, if you like it, drink it. That's great. But it is, those very large production, conventionally agrochemically farmed grapes that go into 100,000 gallon tanks of wine that are then treated enzymatically and tea bags of oak chips are put in them. That's not a wine that expresses a place particularly. It's a beverage product, in the way that, there's a lot of food products out there that don't express. Stouffer's French red pizzas certainly taste good, but they certainly don't express an individual chef's idea of what they're doing. And
they feel dropped in from space. That's the term I always like. I'm like, this isn't connect to anything. Yeah. I can't connect it to a story. It doesn't have context.
Yeah. And that's true for a lot of wine. It's true for a lot of products that we buy and consume every day. But what I think is really interesting is there is wine, and there's a lot of it out there that does express where it's from and does express a kind of personal vision or passion.
Mm-hmm.
And, you're not obligated to get into that, but if you do get into that, it's really exciting. It changes your drinking experience, I guess you would say. And the book's about that in a lot of ways.
Right. To get into it, to invite, to try something new and learn something new about yourself and the food and the place and that kind of thing. There's so much emphasis on the place these days and on very nebulous terms like natural wine and orange wine and, pet nat and all these things that I think the winemaker is getting lost a little bit because there's so much discussion about the place. And I know you've been up close and personal with winemakers. What role do you see with them? They don't manipulate as much as a chef, right?
No. I think the kind of, for winemakers who are trying to make wines that express place, the stated goal is to intervene, to do less winemaking rather than more, as it were, and kind of let the place express itself. But that's a little bit of a romantic fallacy too, because every single wine that you make is a series of decisions, and it starts with how you farm. It starts with how you prune the vines. It starts with some things that are not your decision, like the climate of the year. But when you decide to pick affects the character of the wine. What you do after that, whether you put it in oak, whether you don't put it in oak. So there's this idea that terroir is kind of the holy grail, and that winemaking should be non-present. But the truth is, there's no getting away from winemaking because wine doesn't make itself.
Right.
It doesn't. It
makes
just
vinegar.
Happen. Yeah, it makes vinegar. And just the grapes will drop off and ferment on the ground or whatever in a puddle, but that's not really wine.
Right.
And so we like the romance of terroir, but we also have to. What I try and point out in the book is that there's two stories going on, and one is, where are these grapes from? What is that place like? How does it inform the wine? And the second one is like, what's the story of the person making it, and why do they do things the way they do them, and why did they choose to farm organically as opposed to with chemical fertilizers and so on?
You write, I'm assuming, close to every day, or
yeah, I do.
Not, and so this is. A book project really is a practice and exercise and a choice to kind of torture yourself for
several years. Yes, exactly. A lot of 5 a.m. mornings.
Right. Because you're trying to do it around all the other things you're doing.
Correct.
So, I get it. I've been there. So what did you learn in the book project, this particular book project, that was different or something surprising about wine, about yourself? And the interaction between you and the industry.
Yeah. Well, one thing I learned which was interesting was, in interview, it's a lot of interview material. It's a lot of people in their own words. And one thing that was surprising, which probably shouldn't have been too surprising, was how similarly a lot of people think, and that how the passions that drive them are the same in Lebanon and in, Napa Valley and in Burgundy and in southern Chile. You have this kind of approach or sensibility about wine that I was aware that was present, but it wasn't like put into exactly the same words by a number of people, which was interesting. So the other thing that kind of blew my mind as I researched the book, and I had a lot of wineries in there that I knew were going to be in there, and then a lot that I either didn't know would be in there or didn't even know about. That often, part of the discovery was having winemakers I was interviewing say, when they heard what I was doing, say, "Oh, well, you have to check out this person who's doing this thing." That's the best. And so, the example I've used, Julien Cession in the Rhone, I didn't know his wines at all. And another winemaker told me I had to check them out, and he happened to be in New York, and I went to a tasting and was like, holy moly, these things are fantastic. So that was really cool too. I learned a lot, in trying to put my own explanations or thoughts about organics and biodynamics and regenerative agriculture and what is natural wine on the page. That taught me a lot too, in terms of clarifying thought. There's an argument that there's no point in writing a book. It takes a lot of time and it's a lot of effort. So there's no real reason to write a book if you're not trying to answer some question you don't know the answer to already.
Right.
If you're writing about stuff you already know, that you've decided about, that there's no discovery for the writer, then it tends to be both a boring process and probably a boring book.
Right. Yes. I think it's one of the great treats of the kind of torturous work that we do
Yeah.
is when, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that was what I was looking for, in pieces and even longer form pieces. I have a question and people are like, what are you writing about? And I was like, ooh. And I always say the most lame thing. I'm like, I actually do write, but I'm like, I'm writing about flowers.
Yeah.
Or
Well, it's
also,
the answer is you don't know what you're writing about to some degree until you write it.
Yes. That's why you do the creative thing. That's, Rick Rubin talks about the creative act, and that's one of my fave book of the last year at least, but definitely probably forever when it comes to creativity. And he said, do art so you can figure out things you can't figure out any other way.
Yeah.
So what is there one thing that you can crystallize from that regenerative ag sustainability
I think
focus?
one of the things that I decided in writing the book, which I did not know before, is that wine or grape growing for wine has an opportunity to be two things. One of which is kind of a little bit of what's the way to put it? Like an advanced scout in the realm of farming in ways that are conscientious ecologically. Primarily because it's not a staple.
Absolutely.
You're not trying to farm wheat and feed all of the Indian subcontinent, or rice, or take your pick, whatever grain you want. Wine grapes no one dies if there's no wine. I mean, I might, but I generally speaking,
I'm laying down on the floor and praying for death.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. But the truth is, it gives you a kind of freedom because you're not tied to production in the same way. You're not trying to grow as much fruit as possible, no matter what, and so you can push the boundaries a little bit more in terms of working in ways like regenerative farming or biodynamics. Which, I mean, biodynamics is complicated and interesting and controversial in some ways, but one thing it certainly is, it's very, very hard to adapt to 10,000 acres of wheat.
Right. But you can test the theories of it. I love that term, advanced scout.
Yeah.
That's a great term.
Yeah.
Because that really is what's happening. And then you see in farming, as everything else, there's a trickle down effect. Farming is going to take this one piece of what you do. There's no absolute because there is no absolute climate and no absolute soil.
And that was another aspect of the book, is just learning. I know that climate is changing, but in talking to everybody everywhere in the book, everybody is trying to adapt to these environmental shifts that are happening, which are not just warming trends, but what I didn't realize and quickly learned in talking to people all over the place is that it's, yes, sort of temperatures are warming and harvests are earlier, but also there's a massive increase in just unpredictable, crazy weather.
Right.
Hail or hail when there's not supposed to be hail, or super high winds, or massive heat spikes in California. I mean, people talk about forest fires, which is true, but there's also been these sort of series of vintages with crazy heat spikes. And in the Mosel in Germany, you're also looking at heat as a kind of a weird issue because it was always too cold, and now it's not too cold, and they're trying to adapt to that. So that was very much a process of discovery too.
Since it is more of a theoretical conversation for the Southern Fork Sustenance, I am not going to ask all of the ending questions, but I think that a lot of listeners would stop listening if I didn't ask this last one. So
ask away, definitely. Don't stop listening.
Because
please.
We love to know each other through what we like to eat and drink.
Yes.
And I started asking this question years ago as the death row meal question.
Right.
We talk about it, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Blah, blah, blah. But I don't believe in the death penalty. So I switched it up to actually talk about foods that bring you life.
Right.
And so this is my magic picnic basket question. With this, I can time travel. I can go back and ask anybody to make one more bite of something you would like. I can cook a little bit, and I can source. Although you're probably not going to need me for much of any of that. I would love to put together a basket full of things. They don't have to work as a picnic or a meal. Just some things that when I tell you this, they pop in your head when I ask you this question.
Sure.
And we all know that this is a shifting target because there's nothing like our job.
No, it's literally ask me tomorrow. It'll
eat.
be
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what is it today? What can I put in that basket for you?
Well, let's see. You could put another of those little cheese croissant ham things that you just gave me
from Welton's Tiny Bake Shop in Charleston.
That was mighty good.
Great.
So, and that's an immediate craving. But I always, when I head down south I grew up in Texas, or I'm in South Carolina a lot. Barbecue, Texas is beef, South is pork. I don't really care. Give me either a brisket or pulled pork or something. Or perhaps both. That just makes me happy. I think, really great non-industrial strawberries are one of the great fruits. They're one of the problematic fruits. That's why there's so much pesticides on strawberries in general, is because everything likes to eat them.
Yes.
But if you have great wild strawberries that are just ripe all the way through, that's pretty extraordinary.
And never from the fridge.
Never from the fridge, no.
You got to let them warm up.
Yeah. Let me think what else I would put in there. I mean, it's somewhat, overkill with the barbecue, but I'm a big fan of carnitas too. So it's a lot of trouble for pigs here, but
Yes. So, and the pig, so you're trying to get a category of a fruit and veg in there with the strawberry.
I'm working on it.
But okay, because I hope to share this picnic basket with you, and because I love to share a glass of sparkling with you,
right?
Can you choose a bottle for us to go in that basket?
As a bottle of sparkling?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I mean, I default, probably because I can't afford it, to Krug a lot. I like Krug Rosé. I think Krug Rosé is one of the great, gorgeous sparkling wines of the world. One of the wines I'm pouring today actually would be another option, which is Laurentier Bernier. They're one of the first grower champagne places I ever visited. So they have
I have a picture on my phone from the last time we hung out.
Yeah. And I just love their wines. And, that wouldn't be a bad thing too. But I do want champagne with some age on it. I like champagne when it's had some time in a cellar to kind of develop more of the toasty, kind of caramelized notes, all those sort of tertiary characteristics that people forget champagne ages really well.
And, those little effervescent bubbles will cut that fat for the carnitas, brisket, and pork. And, I mean, if that's not a good meal, I don't know what is.
Stuff goes with everything. Champagne.
All right. If you want to learn more about Ray Isle and your book called
The World in a Wine Glass.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can go to thesouthernfork.com. I'm going to have links there as well as images so you can see the face behind the voice and see this beautiful cover. If you like what you hear, I love to have deep dive conversations with some of the best culinary voices in the American South and sometimes in New York, but while in the American South, sitting in Charleston, South Carolina. So thank you so much. Thanks so much to Graft as they are setting up a wonderful Ray Isle wine tasting behind us and around us. And I can't wait to hang out again.
Same with me.
Okay.
See you next time.
See you next time. Hello and welcome to Talking with My Mouth Full. I'm very excited about wine these days because I have gotten interested in how it's farmed and where it comes from. I love food and beverage and context, and wine is built with context. But I'm going to be honest with you, even though I've always enjoyed wine, I really didn't get into it until I broke the big habit of buying wine at the grocery store and going to smaller wine shops. And this is why. Because I had no idea what to buy, and really what was blocking me from understanding what the big deal about wine was beyond the wine dinners. I knew when I went to a nice fancy restaurant or to a nice restaurant that the wine was much better than what I was picking up at the grocery store, but I thought it really just had to do with my budget. To be honest, I thought I couldn't afford nice wine, and I was stuck going to the grocery store. It was very convenient. I was intimidated to go anywhere else and ask anything, but cue the rise of the wine bar, wine shop in the South. And so I can have a glass of wine, and if I like this wine, I can ask them what other wines that might be comparable. They are interested in building relationships with their guests and with their patrons and their customers. They're not interested in just selling you the most expensive bottle, because if you don't like it, more than likely you won't be back. what happens at the grocery store is because of the way that grocery stores purchase wine and purchase food in general, they have to go with the big distributors. They have to go with high volume. So you're going to miss a lot of the nuances of varietals or regions because you're drinking things that are built for volume. They're built to be homogeneous. And so it's hard beyond just I like Chardonnay and I don't like Cabernet to really drill down beyond that unless you're very astute at the grocery store. And frankly, I'm not. I'm just wanting to get in line. So I'm not that astute. But when I started going to wine shops and sipping, yes, there are expensive wines there, but most wine shops that I've been to, independently owned wine bar wine shops, they actually have an under $20 table, or they will have a shelf that says, here's some starter wines, or here's some wine that's already chilled, or different. I've even been to a wine shop or two that says, here are some porch pounders. And if they're a porch pounder, you don't want to spend $50 or $75 on a bottle. So my bill did not really change, but my enjoyment of wine and my understanding or interest in the nuances of it, they skyrocketed. So just from one wine drinker to another, if you're not a wine drinker, then you can skip this whole conversation. But just from one wine drinker to another, if you go to a store that is dedicated to wine, then you can unlock some things that you like. I'm not saying that I never purchase at the grocery store, because I do. Because sometimes I'm tired, it's raining, or I just need to grab something quick. Or I might be cooking with wine. But it's a lot more rare than it used to be, and my enjoyment of wine and my understanding of wine and my interest in traveling to wine regions has really expanded. So, thanks so much for listening. I will raise a glass of wine to you, my dear listeners, probably in about an hour. And I will be right here next week. Until then.
You've been listening to The Southern Fork. I can't wait to bring you more culinary conversations, but in the meantime, I have one question. Are you gonna eat all that?